Hello and welcome to Dakota Boys Talk Movies. We're going to talk some movies today. Specifically on this episode, Dakota.
Nothing specifically.
Nothing is going... Well, it's going to be very random. Very specifically random, though,
Yeah.
I would say. But we thought it'd be interesting just to kind of discuss the state of movies right now because, Dakota, I know as of late, whenever I throw something at you that has to do with a recent movie, I get almost every time a weary sigh from you, or oh my gosh, I forgot that's still a thing that's happening.
Hey, I haven't forgotten Tenant's happening or Oppenheimer's happening.
Oppenheimer's happening, yeah. But no, like, we were talking about this. What do you think it is? Because right now what we're seeing is, especially even in the big franchises, the things that used to be the draws, is everything's having fatigue. Everything is having the word fatigue thrown after it. It's not the MCU anymore. It's MCU fatigue, and or even just superhero fatigue. And then you have Star Wars, and now they're saying, oh, there's people are having Star Wars fatigue. And then they talk about whatever it is. What was the other thing that they had mentioned that it's been coming up a lot too? But yeah, just the many things that just keep having fatigue thrown on the end now. What's going on, Dakota? What's happening? Do you have fatigue?
No, I am very much awoke, man. which is why I will no longer say ladies and gentlemen. From here on out, it's attention all fairy tale things.
Hello, persons. Excuse me. Living beings. Person might be too specific these days.
Yeah, but I feel like that's just like a fallback. I think because before we started this, we talked about this. There have been some massive hits lately.
There definitely.
Big one, Avatar 2. Now, once again, an Avatar movie is the highest grossing movie of all time.
But is it because there's no fatigue because it took him 13 years or whatever?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I don't think I know anyone that's actually watched that. It's the complete opposite of Top Gun, where it made all this money, but no one's talking about it.
It's true.
Top Gun came out, like everyone was like, "Did you see it?"
In fact, in the past week, Top Gun Maverick has come up twice with people I've been around, and so yes, it's still getting talked about.
Yeah, and like a month ago, I think I randomly just saw like a meme, and it's where Goose and Maverick are in the water, and he's like, "Goose,"
which is the original Top Gun.
and the quote on top was, "Very few scenes in movies go this hard." And I was like, you wouldn't even care about this if the sequel hadn't been made.
Totally forgotten, except that Maverick's out now.
Like no one would care about the death in the second Amazing Spider-Man if No Way Home didn't come out.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about these things. So far in those three you've mentioned, they have been big hits. Avatar: Way of Water.
Yeah.
Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
And No Way Home. No Way Home being the oldest of that bunch.
Yeah.
Coming out in at the end of 2020. No, 2021.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So all three of those in the past year, though, and all still within the window of when this fatigue has supposedly set in.
Interestingly, even though it's been a moment, I feel like the pulse of No Way Home is still feels relatively fresh.
I think so, and I think part of it is that I think everybody wanted to like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. It's just that his movies weren't quite as good, and so just every time Andrew Garfield just shows up anywhere, I think people are just excited to see him, and then it reminds them of how he did get a little bit of redemption. In fact, even at one of the most recent award shows, a face Andrew Garfield made at the camera became a meme now because they were joking about Spider-Man's here to save us, and then it cuts to, you think it's going to cut to Tom Holland, and it's Andrew Garfield, and he just makes an awkward smile, which I thought that was pretty great.
But yeah,
it does. It has stayed relevant.
Yeah, but I think this fatigue thing is just. I think the stuff that's getting pushed on us just isn't exciting.
Right, and I think that's where the real fatigue is. The fatigue isn't for superheroes, and the fatigue isn't for Star Wars. The fatigue is for
Mediocrity.
The mediocrity, the writing, like what they're doing with these intellectual properties that have this really endless amount of things they could do with it is the biggest sandbox in the world is Star Wars, is comic books. It in some ways is even Avatar, because James Cameron has plans to make 18 more of these things, and he's going to make them till he's in the grave apparently. And
then he'll create an artificial intelligence of himself.
You know he's doing that. That guy has the biggest ego of anyone on the planet. You know he's somehow doing that thing that Johnny Depp did in that really bad movie. Trying to put his
transcendence?
Yeah, trying to put his mind into a computer so that he can make movies in his death.
But it's James Cameron, so he'll succeed.
Yeah.
The mind-blowing master of physics.
If anybody's going to be the first person to make a movie from the grave, it'll be James Cameron.
If somebody finally figures out how to turn lead into gold, it's going to be James Cameron.
It's going to be James Cameron. If anybody's ever going to get to the core of the earth because he has to go as deep in the ocean as possible, it'll be James Cameron. Oh, man. But yeah.
Aliens will come to Earth just to meet the genius that is James Cameron.
Yeah. But yeah, so, okay. So what... We talk about that. So what are some examples you would give of movies that potentially, I say potentially just to say potentially, and had a lot of potential to be something great, and then was just abominably mediocre? Like what is something that just immediately comes to your mind in the past, even just year, or maybe a couple of years?
Oh, good Lord. Probably most of the MCU and Star Wars stuff I've seen. Which we're talking movies, right? So there really hasn't been any Star Wars movies, but I kind of felt like Obi-Wan should have just been like maybe a 2 hour and 30-minute movie.
It probably would have been more beneficial for it to at least have been something. A little maybe, because it just got... Well, Obi-Wan's a whole thing. It wasn't even really an Obi-Wan show, but let's not go there. Anyway, yeah... So I'll bring up, here's a few recent MCU examples. We have Eternals, Thor Love and Thunder, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania.
Those last two I skipped.
Okay. So which ones have you seen?
Well,
you saw Thor Love and Thunder.
Yes.
Now, where do you think that one, because that's one where I feel like universally... The broad stroke is that people don't seem to like it. Now, it obviously, I'm sure, has people that do, but broadly, it's not.
For me, it was DOA, man. It was just I went to the theater and I was just like, oh, good Lord, what am I watching? And I went in, and here's the funny thing. I went in fairly excited because in the comics, the storyline where Gore the God Butcher was introduced was actually... It was so good. That story arc kind of became like a modern classic, essentially almost instantly. And I was like, man, and it's Christian Bale playing him.
Right, which is why there was a certain level of hype when this movie was announced, because then like, oh my gosh, and they got Christian Bale, who is going to do something with the role. Yeah.
And I liked his character, but it's like the rest of the film, it's like, what are they really trying to do? And I'm just going to come out and say this. I'm not the biggest fan of Taika Waititi.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What was it, Jojo Rabbit? I was just like, this feels kind of in bad taste, even though it had its moments that I thought were actually fairly decent, but it's just like, it just felt wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Sam Rockwell's in that. I like everything he's in.
Yeah, you're not the first person I have to say that about Jojo Rabbit, that they're like, they understood what he was doing, but maybe he's a bit much.
Yeah, and then the fact that, Chris Hemsworth is kind of like, oh, I'm not doing these roles now. Which here's the funny thing. I don't think a lot of people realize this. When he said that, he was shooting the next upcoming Mad Max movie, which unfortunately isn't a Mad Max movie. It's a young Furiosa movie, and it's Anna Taylor-Joy playing the character of Furiosa. So he made that statement like, I don't think I could be doing this while still filming like what is probably going to be a really intense action movie.
Or at least some sort of action movie, yeah.
Yeah, but I found that hysterical. Like, just, and then he had nothing but praise for George Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, he's not one of those directors.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, this is gonna be crazy, man. It's gonna blow everyone's mind. It's like, no, he has a vision, and he wants you to work with him to help make this vision come alive.
No, it's interesting because I watched Thor: Love and Thunder later at home.
You were the smart one.
Well, but I still watched it, so don't give me too much credit. But I also then was like, I remember got over and I'm like, what happened? You know, I tried to go in, even at that point, even though I'd heard some things, I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. I'll make my own opinion, you know? And I'm like, what happened? It was just sloppy in so many ways. That's the word that I thought of at the end. I'm like, that was just a sloppy movie and wasted. So much was just wasted.
I'm going to come out and kind of bring up something else that I'm slightly worried about. So you love the Batman.
I like the Batman. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I like it quite a bit.
Okay,
yeah.
all right, but you don't want to use the L word, huh?
I don't want to use the L word because, you know, when it first came out, I was like, boy, that's cool. I like this whole new kind of this new world, and what's nice about characters like Batman is you can have Adam West and you can have this and you can do animated stuff and it can all be its own thing. And so I was like, yeah, I have watched it since and I still like it a lot, but I can't really say that I like love it.
Okay.
So,
but this is what worries me. So, and this happened to Tim Burton. These directors will have a movie come out and it's huge. Everyone's talking about it. It's raking in pretty good profits at the box office. And then for that sequel, they're like, well, you know, you did such a good job for us. Here's a little bit more free reign, and it kind of goes off the rails a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like Batman Returns it took me a while to genuinely like that movie as an adult.
It definitely went off. I think even the Warner Brothers was surprised by that one because they really marketed that one to kids too.
Yeah.
Infamously, I should say, it was marketed almost to kids. And then was anything but a kids movie.
Yeah. But same thing. I think same thing kind of happened. I'm pretty sure the same thing just happened with Love and Thunder. They're like, yeah, just do as you please, you know?
Yeah, and that's where I was going. Is that I was like, what happened? And so I watched some behind the scenes things. And I say this a little bit sadly because I think he is good in a lot of things he's in, but Hemsworth had too much free reign because according to how they made it seem in these behind the scenes is that, yes, it was Taika Waititi's vision, but that Hemsworth had a lot of say in how he wanted things to be. And I think part of it was that he has a lot of fun doing broad comedy. And so he wanted to integrate more broad comedy, but in the midst of that, completely lost Thor and just made him a buffoon, really. And I think the reason Disney was okay with that, and this is where we'll get into some of the problems I'm feeling with Disney, because it's not Marvel, it's Disney, is they were okay with him being a buffoon because they knew it was going to make Natalie Portman look all that much better.
Yeah.
Which is part of the problem, is that, especially with the MCU, is that it just feels like they have to keep making all of the characters we loved through Endgame, make them look like idiots now so they can have these cool, young, hip Avengers or whatever kind of usurp them. Well, not in Natalie Portman's case, she's not young and hip, but it's like, but she's a woman, and so they kind of want to push that. And it doesn't mean that like there should never be women in these movies and that. I just want it to be G.I. Joe and no Janes in there or anything. Not that, but it's just like, why do they have to make all these characters that you respected and loved just complete buffoons for the sake of the new person? That's what's really kind of frustrating. I think in a lot of those cases.
Yeah.
Because you didn't see Quantumania, but you could even feel that in that movie that could have easily been a movie where his daughter could have learned that it's good to care about things and it's good to have passion about things and it's good to want to help people with things, but that sometimes those things can be misplaced, and that Scott, through his experiences of having a misplaced seeking of justice by, what got him in prison, and trying to teach his daughter Cassie, I made some of those mistakes too, and it landed me in prison, and I wanted to look and find a better way. Whereas instead, what happens in that movie is she kind of calls him out, being like, "What are you even doing for the world now? You don't even care about anything." And he's like, "Hey, I saved the world." That's what he says to her, which in my opinion, I'm like, yeah, he should be allowed to have a little bit of a break. He helped save the freaking world and bring back people that were gone, including family members and, future family members. And things like that.
So you're saying it's a good thing she probably doesn't know that the rat that released him is the real hero of this story?
And whatever. Even if you want to give the rat credit, I'm fine with that. But the thing with it is like, yeah, he was a part of helping that happen. And she's just like, yeah, but what are you doing now to save the world or to help with the world? And he's like, duh. They just make him like an idiot in that moment. And then through the course of the movie, Cassie, his daughter, isn't really like, she's always on the right side because she has this passion. And it's like, man, you had all this potential to talk about misplaced passion and having wisdom and how to use these things and have this father-daughter relationship that could have been a healthy, actual father-daughter relationship. But no, instead you decided to go essentially the 90s sitcom route of like, here's dumb dad with the kid who knows better. What the heck? And that's where I think it gets into you talking about it's like they have these people who don't know how to do stories or how to build characters. And so you just have to, they're just throwing out the baby with the bathwater for the sake of trying to get you to like these new people better. And you're not going to like these new people better. You're always going to hate them a little bit because they're being so snarky to the ones you truly did love. You're not growing them into these roles. Now, we can even go back to comics. Comic books have done this right for years. When you had Batman and Robin situation, and you had Robin go through a lot, whatever Robin, there were a few different Robins that had this thing where they're just like, I know better than you, Bruce, and kind of go through those rebellious stages, and Bruce and Robin having to work through those things, and one of those being Dick Grayson, who then went off to become Nightwing, and them having to work through all those dynamics, and you as the reader still learning to like Nightwing while understanding that sometimes he was like, there was always this at times unwarranted anger he had toward Bruce, but at the same time you understanding Bruce wasn't always handling the how he handled having a child well. And so all those things that help you just grow with those things, whereas now they don't do crap like that because that's too complicated, and we just need to throw out exactly what you want to hear that's going to keep, like, I don't know, TikTok happy? What are they doing, Dakota?
So recently we went to see John Wick Chapter 4, and there was the trailer for Dungeons and Dragons that was there.
Yeah.
And I was like...
Honor Among Thieves.
Immediately, I was like, okay, get it. Chris Pine's character's in charge of this group, but he has no abilities. He's an idiot.
He's the planner.
Michelle Rodriguez probably saves him more times than he needs to. It's like, got it. Yeah. Oh, and then the younger one that joins their group actually really knows what she's doing, and probably by the end of the film she'll be the leader of the group. It's like, got it. Don't need to see the movie now.
Yeah, the girl from It is going to be the best one, even though she should be the one who's still learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I think they're making all these characters that are hard. Another way they're hard to love is that they're not growing into these roles. So many times they're just immediately amazing. Like Natalie Portman, she's just immediately amazing at being Thor. Kate Bishop, she's just immediately amazing at being Hawkeye. You know, well, the opening credits scene of Hawkeye shows that, you know, she had to shoot a lot of arrows or whatever. Yeah, but it's like she's still only like 18 years old and is doing all these like amazing acrobatic archery things, you know, where it's like she's like besting Clint Barton.
Yeah.
You know,
But
and it's just, I don't know. They just keep doing it over and over again. Again, I'm getting into the shows now, but like She-Hulk is immediately amazing.
Yeah, something kind of going back to the movies though. It's like, okay, having Namor.
Namor.
Okay, I feel like had they done that character a little more closer to the comics, and I feel like they were just trying to get brownie points with minorities by turning him. What was it? He was supposed to have been based off the Aztec people.
Yeah, it was like Aztec related.
And it's just like, okay, all right, whatever. And just
Did you watch that one?
No.
So like they kind of play in this backstory where they were like the family history he came from is they were land dwelling like Aztec people that went into the water to hide from. They were able to gain the ability to be in. I can't even remember. It's so stupid. To hide, you know, to like protect themselves and
see if you just go with I'm sure they were trying to differentiate themselves from Warner Brothers' Aquaman, because that's a character who comes from Atlantis, well, kind of.
Yeah,
but like, man, you should have just gone with it, because I think Namor as a character is really cool in the comics.
I think it would have. Again, that movie was there was another example of. They decided to do something very specific, and I think it's because, once again, I feel like all of the pressure on these things is that the people who are writing these movies are sadly people from our generation and younger, and don't even have proper life experiences or something. And then they're writing these things that are sometimes, I feel like, just how they perceive their life has been and how they've been so persecuted or something. And they try to put it into these movies. And I think at the same time, that because they are people that are our age and younger, most of their education has come from social media, which it drives me bonkers that the new way TikTok sells itself in commercials is TikTok taught me or whatever. Because I'm just like, that's the sad truth, is that people are being educated by 1-minute blips on social media because, God forbid, you read material like books and things like that or watch things, and really, God forbid, you maybe read or watch a documentary from a point of view that you don't agree with. Like, can you imagine, Dakota?
I don't think you're really allowed to have different opinions other than the quote-unquote status quo, the status quo that thinks it's the status quo.
And so that's what I think is missing, is just like, you sometimes in order to really understand other points of view, you have to allow yourself to hear other points of view with the knowledge in your head, knowing maybe I'm not going to agree with this, but it might at least help me understand where they're coming from, even if my conclusion is they're crazy, right?
Yeah.
And that being said, that's what I feel like is missing in these things, is like, you don't have these screenwriters that really have a grasp on reality. And so it's like, because the best fantasy is pulled from different things in reality and trying to, you know, tell those types of stories through a more fantastical situation. You know, I mean, that's essentially what Lord of the Rings is, or Dune is. Like, those are straight up fantasy, and we all know that, but they were authors who were trying to get across bigger ideas through an interesting way that would still draw you into an interesting world too. And boy, that's just something that is very lacking as the years go by.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. I think another kind of huge problem is it's almost like the people behind these movies have no idea of like the history of film.
Could
like,
be.
Like if you ask someone like, "Hey, man, do you remember kind of what Chinatown was about, or say One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or what even Star Wars was about? Was it about female empowerment, or was it like a fantasy but in space?"
Yeah.
Which, and kind of back to George Lucas, this guy pulled a lot of things from his life.
Mm-hmm.
You look at American Graffiti.
Mm-hmm. And even the conclusion of American Graffiti, a lot of people forget that. Yeah, that whole movie is kind of a goofy comedy of sorts, but has a very kind of dour ending talking about Vietnam and things like that entering the picture. And yeah, because George Lucas is pulling from just his life experiences in some ways.
Yeah, or kind of another one would be Martin Scorsese, like the grittiness of New York. Like I think he kind of realized that New York was just scummy and full of these terrible people back in the day, and he kind of injected that into his films.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, man, this is what it's really like living in the Big Apple.
Yeah.
Or another one that's completely different type of filmmaker would be, wow, this is embarrassing. Remind me, who directed Young Frankenstein?
Mel Brooks.
Yeah, Mel Brooks.
Well, and see, and I'm glad you brought up that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to say I'm glad you brought up comedy, too.
Yeah, but Mel Brooks worked on stage plays. He worked on TV shows.
Yeah. One of the best TV shows.
Yeah.
Your Show of Shows, masterpiece.
Which, if you read his book, which if you get the audiobook is even better because he narrates it.
Of course he does. What's it called?
Oh,
It's like a memoir of his early years or something?
No, like his whole life.
Oh, it's his whole life.
He talks about like growing up in New York. Apparently he wanted to be a musician.
Yeah, I knew he liked, which is why he does a lot of musical stuff.
Yeah, but he had a very interesting life. Which interestingly, him being Jewish is kind of part of his identity.
Yeah, kind of tying that into his works. Yeah.
His love of spaghetti. Apparently, that's why he married. That's why he married Anne Bancroft. She made a mean plate of spaghetti. But yeah, from his, because you listen to what his life was like, and you're like, man, that's where he got the idea for the producers. That's where, like, speaking of Anne Bancroft, the movie that they did, there was a remake. And I'm so angry at myself. It's where the acting troupe tries to save the Jewish people.
Oh, God. Yeah, what is that movie called? Man, I don't know if I ever saw that one, but...
Oh, that is... I am so ashamed of myself because that is, for me, a classic. I saw that on TMC one time, and I was like, man, this is really good. I know it's on HBO Max, and like I said, I'm so embarrassed right now, but like there's even little parts of that movie that it's dialogue from stuff that happened with him working on his show of shows. And it's like, see, these real world experiences, like being out there, living, surviving, you could take that. And I think, earlier I mentioned John Wick Chapter 4, that Chad I always butcher his name. Straczynski?
Who are you trying to say? The John Wick director?
Yeah, Chad Straczynski.
It's like Straczynski or something?
Straczynski, yeah. Yeah. But that guy, for the longest time, was a stunt guy. He was actually very famously... he was the stunt double for Keanu Reeves in the Matrix movies. And he comes along with this interesting idea of like, oh, hey, I want to make a movie, but the story's going to be very simple, and basically it's going to be kind of a platform for all this cool like action stunt work and these cool shots and scenes, and he pulled from his past experience. And I hate to say this, but I can't. Yeah, I feel like these people kind of who are writing these movies now grew up in a bubble, and they're kind of just regurgitating what they've been fed.
Yeah.
And
To Be or Not to Be.
To Be or Not to Be.
Yeah,
Which,
I never have gotten around to watching that one. That one's pretty good.
yeah, it's a remake because one was actually made in the 40s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but great movie. Great kind of comedic cast.
Well, and that's why I'm glad you brought up comedy because, you know, that's another. And I think all of this goes back to there's so much it's all about trying to get the most universally accepted thing onto the screen so that you get the biggest amount of people in there. And so I feel like there's a lot of things that just aren't being done for fear of being canceled, for fear of losing money, you know, all these things that kind of enter that realm. And it's like, you know, Mel Brooks, for example, even though I don't necessarily like everything he does, it's just like if he were to be a fresh voice today and not be now entering death because he's getting very old.
Yeah.
But if he were to be a fresh voice today, he would be canceled.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wouldn't happen. And you know, and that's the other and so I think there's that mixed with the attention span is so lost that there's so many people where we don't have the attention span we used to. And I think it goes back to 1 minute blips. You know, everything has to be in 1 minute, you know, and things like this. You know, in fact, I just heard someone who who was it? They were in the movie, but then they also wrote it. And they were talking about when they were testing it on audiences, they were saying how you have to make sure that you have some sort of emotional connection with the audience every minute or like within every few minutes of the movie. So it basically means like every few minutes of the movie, you better have something that's going to make them laugh or, you know, maybe it's a moment where, yeah, it's going to end up maybe pushing them toward cry. And they're so like worried about these formulas that it's like, how are you ever going to tell maybe a story you want to tell when all you're worried about is, I have to make sure that if I lose, every 90 seconds, I got to make sure I don't lose them. I mean, think about that, Dakota. You're going to lose your audience if every 90 seconds you don't have something that pulls them back in, you know, and because what I'm getting at there is essentially what she was referring to was something, like I said, an actual moment that's going to make them like audibly laugh or things like that. I'm not talking about a compelling performance, and sometimes in a compelling performance, it's about the burn, the slow burn of moving through that journey. You know, that is just like how are movies like that ever going to happen anymore? You know?
Yeah, I think that's the problem with these blockbusters is they've gotten no one cares about almost like good storytelling anymore. It's like they got to throw like the next thing at you. Like it's got to be like a roller coaster ride. Like you got to be thrown one way, then upside down next minute, and then you're like oh my gosh, you're like white knuckling it as you're coming down off the loop. And it's because I'm gonna be honest with you, I watched the last Jurassic World movie, and I was like, man, I really did not need to see this.
You know, and that's one that, you know, even though there's moments in the other ones that you could be like, oh, that was neat, or oh, that was cool how they pulled that off. At the same time, none of them have been necessary after the first one.
Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form. You know, they do things, and I mean, in some ways I understand Jurassic World because it's like, oh, we want to bring it back to the big screen for a new generation. And so, like, you kind of get that. But it's like, even that is just like, you might as well just show them the original one.
There you go. Every 4 years, we'll just re-release.
Sounds good to me. I mean, it sounds like a plan to me. But yeah, and so, and I think, you know, that is a big issue that I think is becoming more and more apparent. There's a lack of originality because honestly, when we went to Dune and we saw Dune, I was shocked when after a few weeks that ended up being, it wasn't a blowing up the box office thing, but it was doing well.
Yeah.
Considering it was also released on HBO Max, simultaneously?
Yes, it
For
was.
45 days or something. It wasn't, and then they took it off for a while, and then now it's back on or whatever. But so I was just shocked. And part of why I was shocked was that was a very restrained movie in a lot of ways. It wasn't, there wasn't quipping, because a lot of times in movies now, and some of that is, a lot of people blame Marvel for that. But I mean, it was happening in other things too, where it's like, even when you're kind of a more serious movie, you got to make sure you get quips in, and again, I think that's part of that. You got to keep people watching. You got to keep them engaged and things like that. And so get those quips in. And there was just like a restraint to Dune where it was just like, it went through. And then honestly, it doesn't even really have a proper ending. It just kind of stops.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that you always knew there was going to be a part 2. And so I was shocked, but I think the reason that was still the hit it was because it was something that already existed. Dune was already a thing that was around.
Yeah.
And so what I'm curious about is if you made a movie that had the restraint and the pacing of Dune, but was in a completely original thing, would it actually make money? And I'm talking about if you put the same amount of money, because I think Dune also cost, $175 million or something.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about something that had... So in order to make money, it would have to be a movie that would be an original thing made for the same budget with that sort of pacing. So we're talking a movie that was going to have to make probably $300 to $500 million minimal just to be considered a moderate success. I don't think it would happen.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad, which is why, even go back a little further, Pacific Rim didn't do that well. It was an original idea that you would think that, I think if that movie would have been made in the 80s or 90s, it would have been a hit and would have been still lauded and talked about. Whereas it barely did good enough to warrant even a sequel, but it was a sequel without the original director and with a whole new cast. And so, yeah, it's like I don't know. It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, but I really feel like James Gunn kind of doomed any DC films coming out recently when basically this is all getting rebooted, so it doesn't matter anymore. And that's kind of why I didn't care to see Shazam, because I was like, okay, it'll be on HBO eventually. I'll watch it there.
Yep.
Apparently the test screening for the Aquaman movie, the sequel's just doing terrible.
Oh no.
Which is a movie they've already completely reshot.
Yeah, it's been made twice.
Yeah.
And has had post-production 4 different times, I think.
Yeah, it's just, oh man. We're not getting a Wonder Woman 3 apparently because Patty Jenkins just wanted to bring Chris Pine's character back one last time. And yeah, I made that as a joke to Steven, and then come to find out that was her plan.
I can't believe that.
She was going to bring him back again.
Maybe this time he was going to actually be back, though, and not just through a proxy. That was really creepy.
Yeah, and then apparently they're like, Patty Jenkins, what else do you got? She's like, I don't do rewrites. It's like, I gave you the script I was going to make. That better be.
And then she lost her Star Wars movie in the meantime, because that's what Star Wars likes to do, is bring people on and then fire them.
And that's another thing. I wish they would quit letting people both write and direct. Because, one, I noticed when that's the case, the movie takes longer. And on top of it, like just the director could let his ego just go wild.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that.
I don't know if you ever saw It Chapter 2.
What was that one that just went off the rails?
Yes,
too much
yes.
or what?
Well, he made all that money for Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers like, hey,
the first one?
Yeah, with the first one, and they're just like, here's more money. Just make sure the kids from the first one that everyone loved are in it, even though they're going to be older. And just do whatever you want. So he made just an incredibly bloated, incredibly drawn out.
Well, I know it was long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it was just silly, just incredibly silly. And you could say the same thing of Thor: Love and Thunder. Like, things just went off like the success thing. They'll just throw money at them and be like, "Hey, do what you want because you made us money." And I feel like they should like give them a little bit of leeway, but it seems like the more and more it happens, it's kind of getting out of hand. I think another example besides Love and Thunder, oh crap, this is a movie I don't think we talked about, but Malignant. It's like James Wan made $1 billion for Warner Brothers, and they're like, "Hey, you have a script for a horror movie you want to go do?"
And it was just crazy.
Yeah, like, "Oh yeah, hell yeah, we don't need to see the script. Just do it, man. Just do it." And I love Malignant, but only because it's so insane what's going on. Like, that is...
Well, I know it's like Tumor Twin or something, but
Yeah, that is...
so that here's something that I think about too a lot is that, some of the best movies over the decades are ones that have been things going wrong or why the movie ended up being good. Like Jaws, they couldn't get the shark to work, so they're kind of like, well, we're just going to figure out a way to film without the shark. On Star Wars and even in Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas had all these other bigger things he wanted to do and kind of flesh out the world that he couldn't do, which some of that he was able to eventually kind of work into the prequels, which is why maybe those are a little more bloated and longer and things like that. But sometimes, those things that you think you needed that you end up not getting because it just is working out end up being for the benefit of the movie, which sometimes leads me back to, do you think some of these movies could be better if they weren't given as much money? Because sometimes, and why I say that is because, like, let's take like Black Adam, Fast and the Furious even, where they're just like, it's so much big CGI that you don't even care about anything because everything's just giant cartoons swinging around the screen.
Yeah, I really think no one's learned their lesson from the Transformers movies.
Right. Those would have been the biggest problem with those movies, is just 20 minutes of cartoons slamming around, and then
each one kept getting more bloated.
just bloated and bloated.
Ridiculous. And it's that franchise may have made money, but it ran itself into the ground.
Yeah. And what happened? They ended up making a very restrained, smaller budget Bumblebee movie,
which is the best out of all of them.
That seems to be the one that people are going back and rewatching, even though it didn't do well in theaters. But the reason it didn't do well in theaters is because everybody had been so turned off by the last 5 Transformers movies or whatever.
Yeah, that no one even cared about it last night, I think.
Yeah, which is why it kind of stopped, because I think that one was the first one to kind of not do quite as well. It was finally ran its course.
Yeah, even the Michael Bay fans, I think, were kind of just cold on it.
Yeah. Yep. It was just too much. And and that's the thing. It's like there a lot of times what happens, especially when you get to like, okay, you have like a movie that's a little bit of a success. So they're just like you're talking about, they're just like, make the next one, and they just throw them like briefcases of money, and then you're like, what happened? Why wasn't that one as good? And and part of it is that nobody's telling them to stop, and nobody's telling them we can't do that, because in our minds we think the phrase anything is possible is a good thing, but a lot of times what ends up on the screen with the anything is possible is just a big bloated mess, that didn't have any fat trimmed, and sometimes that needs to be trimmed even before you even film it, where you're sitting there realizing this just isn't going to happen. We're going we're gonna have to figure out a way around this, which is what I think is happening even with a Star Wars stuff too, is that well all of the TV is that what's happening is now people have this expectation because of streaming that the TV shows need to be at the same quality as the movies, and so they're having to do these shorter seasons, but in some cases, like you talked about with Obi-Wan, it would have been better if it were a movie.
Yeah.
But they realize, like, maybe we need people to get on our streaming service, so we'll just turn it into like an episodic show. But then there's other cases where it's like this would have benefited maybe from taking out maybe you don't need all those big shots you think you need, stretch it into maybe even 15 episodes and get to know the people a little bit, and get to know the characters, build on these people instead of just being like, oh, we gotta run to the next big set piece that's gonna blow your freaking mind or whatever. And I don't know, and that's the thing. It's like I kind of am wondering if, well, okay, this isn't the part I'm wondering about, but it goes without saying Hollywood's dying. It's bleeding. It's maybe not gonna. I'm not saying it's going to die, but I'm saying it definitely is at a point where they're at a crossroads, where one way is death, and one way is redemption. And if they keep going on the trajectory they're on, they're gonna bleed out. They're gonna bleed out, and because I think right now is if they allow themselves to keep bleeding out, the future is in independent. There's these other smaller studios that their movies aren't costing as much, but they're already getting a built-in fan base because the audience is involved in making the movie happen. There's these things like Angel Studios, which they're more faith-based. But then what's that one that came out that's kind of working in Hollywood a little bit? They're called like Legion M or something, where it's like the audience is investing into the movies that are being made.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I think if Hollywood keeps bleeding out the way they're going, that's the future, because then the movies that are getting made are the ones that the people are wanting to happen because they're invested in its success, and so you already have this built-in audience that you're wanting to not just maybe just please, but you're also it's giving you your marketing is almost kind of free in a sense too, because all these people are going to be excited about the project. You're bringing them in a little bit on the project that's going on, and then they're being your advocates of telling people about it and building esteem, because the best way to get people to go to your things is not by having enough commercials on during a basketball game or a football game, but it's by people telling other people. And so
I think the one real way to kind of make money now when it comes to putting movies in theaters is that you have to have people coming back a second time to see them.
And bringing friends.
Yes. And, some of these films, it's just, like, I'm okay never seeing The Eternals again.
And some people don't even want to go the first time.
I completely just forgot how Shang-Chi ended. One night, a guy I work with was like, hey, remember at the end of Shang-Chi? And I was like, man, is that really what happened? I guess if you say so.
And why does that movie feel like it was 10 years ago?
I don't know. Are they even working on a second any of this stuff?
They
hired Kit Harington to play the character the Black Knight, and
I'm pretty sure that's dropped.
Yeah, it's just sad.
And I think part of the reason it's dropped is that they had to completely redo the Blade movie, and Blade was kind of tied to what they were going to do with the Kit Harington character based on that post-credit scene where you could hear Blade's voice. And so I think because of the fact that Blade is having to be refigured out, they had to drop that whole... And Eternals just did so horrible. Ant-Man did worse. And part of it is that instead of trying to care and cultivate these movies into something. They're just like, if we I don't know, they're just kind of getting lazy, and they're just like, oh, if we hype this enough, people are going to go, so who cares? But what they did, well, it's kind of a rumor because it was like somebody who worked on the movie told somebody else that what happened with Ant-Man was that money was pulled from Ant-Man and given to Wakanda Forever. And so the Ant-Man 3 people were just said, make it work, which is why that movie does look like it's just them standing on a green screen the whole time. And, they tried to come up with clever quantum creatures, but it's all just green screeny looking.
Yeah.
Whereas Wakanda Forever was given all of the extra help and the extra aid and the extra budget and was minimally better, for it.
There are movies that do kind of give me hope. One we didn't get a chance to talk about yet. Maybe in the future. The Menu. The Menu was such a solidly written movie, directed with precision.
Yeah.
And incredibly strong performances all around. Ralph Fiennes, man, did a hell of a job. I did find it interesting. The 3 leads in that movie are all British, but their characters are all American.
Yeah.
But that was such a great movie. And then this one may surprise you. Puss in Boots.
Yeah.
Puss in Boots was, for a movie that obviously was meant for kids. I was like, okay.
Was it though? Because it was.
It felt like it was more aimed for fans of the Shrek, which would be us, because that movie came out when we were young. Like,
honestly, and I think that's the beauty of it, is that I don't even like the Shrek movies.
And here's the thing,
but I thought The Last Wish was very well done on many levels.
Yeah, I think there was only one scene that I felt was like a little off. But I don't even know which of those are my favorite characters. Even the Baker's Dozen guys, I love them. For the little amount of they're on screen, I think they're awesome.
The Jack Horner, yeah.
The Jiminy Cricket. I don't even know.
He was the ethical bug who talked like Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you should be doing that.
See, he deserves a movie all by himself.
The ethical bug.
Yeah, he deserves. Because how that ended, I was like, oh man, he's the hero of this movie.
Yeah, yeah. And we didn't even get into that. That's the other one. That was the other fatigue I was trying to think of that's come up, is Pixar. Here's the thing, is that Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is from DreamWorks.
Yeah.
Which for years I thought was just a joke. They had How to Train Your Dragons are pretty solidly good. And they had a few others that were peppered through there that were good, but a lot of them were just really forgettable. A lot of the DreamWorks are really forgettable.
Hey man, they were responsible for the Kung Fu Panda renaissance that we had there for a bit.
And even Kung Fu Panda, it's like, by the third one, people had kind of lost interest. But again, they were solid.
Like, that's a movie where the villains, as they went along, I thought were really well written, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that movie brought it with the villains. And then The Last Wish had probably one of the scariest villains of all time.
Yeah, the Puss in Boots movie. Yeah. And then the animation is really cool. And then the other one that more recently DreamWorks has done, The Bad Guys, was another solid movie. And that's what leads me over to Pixar, which Pixar isn't even Pixar anymore. It's just Disney.
Yeah.
And it's just sad because, again, I feel like they're having so many more misses than hits. And part of it is that they used to put so much care and attention into the story that even ones that aren't even held up as being the greatest, like Bug's Life, is still immensely more watchable than some of the more recent ones like Luca.
That's something that is unfortunate. I really wish Disney hadn't bought up all these companies, because they lost their identity.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's so excited to have Oh, I'm sorry, not the X-Men, the mutants.
Yeah.
Get excited for the mutants, everybody.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, Wolverine, we're going to see him smoking a cigar. No. We're going to see him with a shot of whiskey in his hand. No.
They'll be violent, but nothing else will be like Wolverine.
No. You won't ever see him actually pop his claws. He'll be wearing gloves, so you can't see it come out of the flesh.
Oh, you think that's how they're going to do
Yeah,
it?
and he won't do the, like in X2 where he just put his freaking claws through a guy's chest.
Yeah, both of his fists just go right into that.
You won't see that. He'll probably be like kind of a dour, grumbly character.
And those claws are going to be CGI.
He won't be eyeing Jean Grey lustfully. They'd be like, Jean, I respect that you and Scott are in a relationship, but can a man wish? Like Wolverine would never say some garbage like that.
You're giving it more credit than I think. Jean Grey is going to be a lesbian. you know that when that movie comes out, half of them are going to be gay. Because what they're going to do is they're going to go, well, that was Stan Lee's whole idea behind them is that it was supposed to be an allegory for that, which is interesting because when we were kids, what we were told was that it was an allegory for the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And so it's just funny how that just kind of keeps changing with the times with whatever narrative they wanted to, which I think the civil rights one is true.
Yeah.
But that they've tried to change the narrative on that.
Once you realize Professor X is Martin Luther King with his kind of Gandhi way of going about things.
Yep.
And then Malcolm X is obviously Magneto.
Magneto's kind of the Malcolm X.
Yeah. It's like it makes sense.
Yeah, it fits the civil rights.
Yeah,
and it's really cool because I think it is a it works well. Like getting across the whole civil rights movement and how those things kind of function to kids.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame because they're gonna race swap some people, gender swap some people. And it's like you don't have to do that because the X-Men was already this like homogenous group of people.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean the fact that, even as far back as that, you had Storm, who was like, Haitian, right?
I think she actually was from Africa.
Yeah, because she had was it African?
Yeah.
And and that she was a big part of the team, one of the leaders, in fact.
Yeah.
And plus, you still had Rogue, and you had Kitty Pryde, and all these others that were females, and Jean Grey, where they did kind of have a lot of diversity within it as it is. But yeah, you're right. There's probably
when we were kids, Jubilee was a huge thing.
Jubilee,
she's supposed to be Asian.
Yeah, they made her a big deal in that animated series.
Yeah, but it's just
which makes me interesting how that X-Men '97 show is going to end up being. Like, what are they going to really? Everybody's excited for that because it's going to be like a direct follow-up season to that X-Men '90s show, but it's like they're going to screw it up.
Yeah, I keep coming across these box sets of these cartoons from when we were kids, and I'm just like, man, I'd love to get my hands on an X-Men animated series.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just sad because it's like it's hard. Like there's so many things you want to be more excited about, and it's hard to be excited about because you're just like the first thing that comes in your head is, what are they going to screw up in this one?
Yeah,
or what are they going to change in this one to try to fit some new narrative that they're hoping is going to get people to give them those applause hands on social media or whatever. And it's just sad. I don't know. But, to kind of wrap this all up here, now that we're pushing like an hour, what are some things are there things you are excited about in the future, optimistic about, things that are coming where you're like, oh, I still have hope for that on the horizon here?
The ones I am excited about are so far away, they feel like 20 years from now. The sequel to the Batman, the follow-up to Deadpool, which as more and more comes out, like that just sounds like it's going to be No Way Home, but instead of Spider-Man, it's the X-Men from the director who we will not name, but
so it'll be kind of a mixture of No Way Home with Days of Future Past, maybe.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean that could work with a little bit of more humor.
And that's something that I think you could kind of say that Fox's Marvel stuff was a little bit better at. They weren't afraid to get grim.
Yeah.
Like, you saw Storm frickin' die. Storm, like
Yeah.
a major character. And Patrick Stewart's professor, he was going to buy it, man. He was going to buy the farm.
Yeah.
For real this time, but he got saved at the last minute. And
Yeah.
it's just like, I wish the MCU had that, where like the stakes were just a little bit more up there. Things were a little more, okay, we do this now, or
even you bringing up the fact that Wolverine had claws, and that he used them. I mean, yeah, that was things that just wouldn't happen under certain, like you said, Disney's just gonna have certain things, or that he's just gonna not even just grab a shot of whiskey, but just grab the whole bottle.
Like, I'm so glad Disney has nothing to do with the Mutant Ninja Turtles. Because if they did, they would pull out their weapons, do like the cool pose, and
then never use them,
and then twirl them, and like do some cool move, and then immediately when the enemy comes at them, they put them away and just fight with their fists.
Yeah, literally they have size. Like, one of them just has too many swords. He should be just hacking people.
Going back to John Wick, because we found out the nunchuck. Yeah, you could mess a dude up with some nunchucks.
That was like, boy, you forget how brutal of an instrument the nunchuck was.
That movie is probably banned in Great Britain.
Why did they ban nunchucks there?
Because of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Kids were like, I want some nunchucks.
Oh, that's funny.
And then they treated it like the way something like The Exorcist got treated. Where it's like, oh my God, we need to ban this movie.
Maybe in UK they CGI swapped it with like a licorice rope. He's just slapping them with a licorice rope.
No, it's feather dusters on strings. He has like a feather duster that's attached with strings.
Yeah. So you brought up, let's see, what'd you bring up? You brought up Deadpool 3. You brought up the Batman.
And Dune.
Dune Part 2, which comes out later this year.
Which, that one thing I am stoked about that is going to, just based on the book, is going to be like, basically like Wrath of Khan, like everything's going to be kicked up to 11.
I hope so. Yeah, and Denis Villeneuve, the director there, I feel like he is one that is willing to march to his own drum a little bit. Like, he isn't one that... And I feel like maybe the studio's going to let him have the leeway where it's not like, you can't do that. You got to, where it's like, yeah, I hope he is able to go there to tell the story well, instead of trying to have to kind of water it down, a little bit here and there to try to get it. Because if they're able to continue this, where it leads with Paul Atreides is, Dune is really just setting up the fact that Paul Atreides ends up being kind of a crappy messiah of sorts. And so, it would be interesting. I just hope they're able to do that well and tell that story interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I suppose, and this is very on the horizon. I think James Gunn is going to really take his time working on these movies that are coming up, and I am excited that he is going to be directing Superman, because I think he understands the character
better than some who've done it more recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the problem, like I said, Warner Brothers had this problem where they've had people, not directors, but producers, executives who don't understand these characters. Like, for the Justice League, they were like, okay, Batman, but it's a woman and she's from Sparta. Yeah, she's going to like Spartan kick people and cut people's heads off, and it's like, I don't know if we want that. And then, we're gonna do Batman, but he's like an underwater type dude, and like, no, that's originally what they wanted for the Justice League. They wanted them all dark, they wanted them all broody, they wanted them incredibly violent.
Yeah, and I think that's what I hope for more than anything, is that James Gunn is able to put in the sense of hope and wonder again into a Superman movie, that even though things go bad at times and he gets beaten down, that he still stands for truth and justice and, the American way, if you're allowed to say
Yeah.
that still, but that he still, because, that's what just didn't work in Man of Steel, is that she's like, so what does the S stand for? And he's like, hope, and stuff. But it's like Zack Snyder never did a really good job at portraying hopefulness, even though he tried to act like that's what Superman was about. It's like, yeah, but you never showed that or treated him with that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of strange.
Yeah, and then it does sound like he was kind of, because Christopher Nolan didn't want to do any more superhero movies.
Right.
It sounds like they're like, hey, we got Christopher Nolan light. Because he was originally handpicked by Christopher Nolan. He's like, hey, this is the guy I'm going to trust to do these movies. Because everyone forgets that Zack Snyder was his choice to direct Man of Steel. And apparently Zack Snyder did want Superman wearing his underwear, which I don't know how to feel about that anymore. Like Chris Reeve pulled it off, but that was kind of like back in the day.
Yeah.
But I have faith because James Gunn is a comic book guy. He understands comic book characters.
He's good at hitting emotions too, at
Yeah.
understanding like emotions and stuff. And I think, especially in like Superman things, is like, if there's any of the superheroes that you should feel a certain emotional attachment to and hope for and want to succeed, it would be Superman. And so
Yeah.
I hope he's able to bring that, and that just like when you watch the old Christopher Reeve ones, even the ones that aren't as great, because of how Christopher Reeve portrayed it and how he carried it through, you're still rooting for him to succeed, and you're still wanting him to push through because he's the one who's bringing hope and justice and all those things. And so I hope they're able to kind of bring that quality back in
Yeah,
into the mix, because we're already going to have Matt Reeves continuing on this gritty Batman world or whatever, and that's fine. It can be its own thing or whatever. But I think that's what I hope more than anything going forward is that some of these movies, that they can just leave them all separate, that you can have a disgusting Batman world, but you can have a more colorful, vibrant Superman world, and then Joker, I guess, can still fit in somewhere in its own world too. That you can just have these different things, just like how comic books are.
Yeah.
Like you can pick up and you can read Detective Comics, and you can pick up and you can read the Batman line, and you can pick up and read World's Finest, and all of those have their own flavor of those characters, or Action Comics,
Yeah.
And so, they all have their own flavors, and even when there is like a similarity between them, that the worlds are still different. So I hope they learn to do that a little bit with these movies too.
Here's what I'm hoping. I hope they just lay into the lore, because we had 2 Wonder Woman movies and they didn't even go anywhere near like the Greek pantheon of gods. They kind of did.
Yeah.
But the comics did, and there's some interesting stuff back there in the comics. Characters like Atlas, Hercules, they're still running around. But
yeah, they kind of teased those a little bit wasn't it in the Snyder Cut? The battle with all the gods and stuff.
Well, you only saw a couple of them. You saw Artemis, which is the goddess of the hunt. You saw probably, I think, the coolest live action God of War ever.
Yeah, that's true.
Zeus, that stud. Oh,
Yeah.
man. I think they were the only ones, but would have been cool to have seen Poseidon,
Yeah.
Hephaestus, like wielding a giant like hammer.
I'm all of a sudden reminded that Thor: Love and Thunder ended with a Hercules reveal, didn't it?
Yeah.
Ooh. Well, okay. We'll move on. But yeah, and so and that's the thing. It's like, Illumination, another place that makes animated movies. They were kind of in a rut for a while where everything was Despicable Me and Minions, and I'm happy to see that that Nintendo decided to partner with them for this Mario Brothers movie that's coming up, because I think that could be, we don't know yet, but could be a match made in heaven, that I'm glad that Mario Brothers isn't being made by Disney for multiple reasons. Yeah. And I don't think it would have worked well with DreamWorks, but I think Illumination might be the right place to get the quality of animation because as those Despicable Me movies went on, the Minion movies, the animation just got better. And I think these trailers for Mario Brothers are showing that, like, oh, this animation is pretty well done. But I think also Illumination does do fun and funny well, even if you don't like everything about the Minions. They still were able to do a lot of clever things. And so that's one that's more recent, more coming here soon, that I am optimistic. As we were talking about, just like, man, even animation's kind of struggling right now, but there are these like lights, like you said, Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, The Bad Guys, where DreamWorks has maybe found a little bit of a new groove. Another one I'm excited for is the next Spider-Man Spider-Verse movie.
Oh yes, I keep forgetting about that, even though I was stoked for it when I saw the trailer.
Yeah, and that's another, and it's Sony. That's another studio where for a long time I'm like, man, Sony is really falling apart. But they've really kind of been pushing and up in their game again. And so I'm excited that they're kind of trying to like, and I think some of it is that they have a couple of these things that they're still able to hold on to, that they're trying to push through, because even Venom found its audience. You know,
I do enjoy the Venom movies though. They got like
that's what I mean.
Like
but I guess what I mean is, like, it's still weird to me that those movies were hits.
Yeah.
But they were, and they're entertaining and fun in their own crazy sort of way. Because even the second one is pretty fun, even though it's maybe not quite as at the level of the first one as far as just everything.
I think their whole thing was they wanted to like show that there were other superpowered people running around, and maybe that's that idea kind of maybe got the best of them.
Maybe. But that being said, I am a little nervous about the Kraven the Hunter movie they're working on, and the Madam Web movie they're working on with, apparently it's going to have Spider-Woman in it.
Which is hilarious because, folks, he's wearing a Madam Web t-shirt.
I am. You got me this.
Yeah.
Which I do like it. And I do like Madam Web and like the animated series and stuff like that. And so like I said, I am nervous about where those could go, because those could really go either way and how that's going to work. Especially with I'm like, Dakota Johnson being Madam Web is kind of weirding me out.
Feel like they really should have just went with Helen Mirren, but they're probably like, we can't get Helen Mirren for however movies.
Or Dame Judi Dench.
Yeah,
she's literally almost blind.
Is she really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Which is why she doesn't want to be M anymore, but I don't think she will be anyway. But the last movie she could just barely see.
Helena Bonham Carter?
There you go. That would have been a cool choice. I like that. Yeah, and so, but especially this Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, as they're calling it, since apparently it's going to be another part to it, is that, Lord and Miller, I think, are another one they're kind of this interesting kind of voice, because they did that Mitchells versus the Machines, which is another more in the past few years that was unique animation, kind of a fresh take on things. And I think they've been good about bringing in good story that also has heart and fun, and again has funny, but isn't just fart jokes and a dog peeing on somebody, like stuff like that. That's just like, what are we doing here? But that is legitimately clever. And what they've been doing with what they did with that first Spider-Verse movie, which now seems like where this is going, is like trying to find a unique animation style while still tying this whole world together and having fun with it and playing with it. And so I hope they're able to kind of make it work again and keep that ball rolling on that stuff too. But yeah, like the next Dune, I'm excited for where they're going to go with that too.
It is unfortunate because I feel like Lord and Miller is so underutilized.
Yeah, and they have like
they got fired from the Star Wars movie.
Right, in which there's some studio or company that they have like first, what do they call it, where you get first dibs on when new scripts come in, first pass or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know who that's with, but it's like, if they have that, it's not like they're really actively, maybe they've just been so tied down to this Spider-Verse stuff and other things that they just haven't had really been working too much or act that we know of.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But and then one movie that they had planned, and unfortunately they scrapped, and I feel like we really missed out was the 21 Jump Street sequel where it was they were going to be Men in Black.
Yeah, where it was going to be MIB 23. Yeah, that would have been nuts. But International killed that last MIB.
That's another one where it's like, oh man, how do you not make because that movie had a great cast.
Yeah.
It's like how do you mess that up?
Well,
good cast.
From what I understood, again, mediocre story. Just didn't do anything with it, and so
they even drew Liam. Oh wow, I almost said Liam Hemsworth into it. Liam Neeson into it.
Yeah,
he was briefly in it.
And I guess an important thing to say too is that even back in some of those older movies that get looked back on fondly, still, it's not like they were original. That a lot of movies through the years, since the beginning of movies, have been based on books. But that they're taking those books and bringing them to the screen for the first time or in a new way, and that's a thing I just think is being like in some ways being underutilized or not just being done well, is that we're not looking to the great books. Well, I mean they are, but it just feels like, I don't know, it's another place where they're struggling, like where they are trying to bring some of these books to the screen, but they're bringing ones that are like really specific messages that just are kind of annoying. Now, what did you now Everything Everywhere All at Once, would you say that was
one of the greatest movies of all time?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're in that category?
I'm kidding. I found it immensely entertaining, and considering that they didn't have this massive budget behind it, I thought it was an interesting concept. For me, it's a movie where like bits and pieces of it are great as opposed to overall.
Correct. I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It had some great, like I said, great moments. James Hong, man, that dude is still around making movies
and still killing it.
Yeah, he's great. It's just and of course the cast of that movie won some Academy Awards and
a lot. Yeah, it was weird. It won Best Picture. Can you believe that?
Whoever would have thought two actors from Encino Man would win Academy Awards at the same time?
Yeah.
Encino Man.
For movies that weren't comedies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so sometimes when those movies happen, why I bring up that is that I think sometimes the wrong lessons come out of those movies. It's like the Matrix dilemma, where when Matrix came out, everybody was like, oh, it's like this original idea, and it's so cool. But then instead of people coming up with other original ideas, they just tried to make the next Matrix in terms of just looking like the Matrix. And so it worries me that sometimes the lessons that come out of Everything Everywhere All at Once are, it's not about they had this cool, clever idea that also told this kind of they told a family drama through this crazy multiverse story. But that the lesson that comes out of it is, it's got to look like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Nothing can look like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's kind of the Quentin Tarantino thing where everything was trying to be like Pulp Fiction after Pulp Fiction came out. Where instead of people going, oh, he might have struck lightning in a bottle with just his own way of screenwriting, because Quentin Tarantino has a very specific style of writing, that everybody thought they could just, if they just made their movie look like Pulp Fiction, it was going to be the next Pulp Fiction, instead of just trying to be the next, I use original idea in that case, even though Quentin Tarantino, all his movies are based on other movies, but it's still his own creation,
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. And then so that you always kind of get worried about that. Because, speaking of multiverse, that was another Marvel movie we forgot to bring up, is Multiverse of Madness that came out, where that was one where I feel like just had too much studio interference and missed the mark in a lot of ways, and was very reliant on you caring about WandaVision and people watching WandaVision.
The horror elements of that movie I really liked.
They did. I mean, and that was the thing, is Sam Raimi was still able to get in some of his Sam Raimi-isms, which was helpful.
Yeah.
But I did appreciate it a lot more on second viewing. The first time I watched it, I'm like, oh, I don't know. And then I did feel a little better about it a second time through.
You really do have to wonder, though, how those dime store Avengers were able to beat Thanos.
Yeah, it does make you wonder because they were so stupid in that moment of that movie.
That just made that version of Captain America, well, Captain Carter,
yeah,
just made them look not as great. Like they managed to elevate Steve Trevor by just having that scene where they attempted to take on Wanda and she just murders them.
Yeah, and honestly, it doesn't make any sense that the last two standing were Captain Carter and Monica Rambeau or whatever is Captain.
I still do love the fact that Monica Rambeau gets killed by a statue of Xena, Warrior Princess. Still my favorite scene of any movie.
I just feel like Professor X should have outlived them all. And that he was kind of done dirty without what they did with him, but I feel like he should have been able to fight her off longer than he did.
That's another thing. I feel like when we do start seeing the mutants.
The mutants, yes.
Yes, I feel like they're going to just, once again, they're going to find a way to just constantly sideline Professor X. Because, maybe. The TV show handled him better. The cartoon handled him better.
Yeah.
But I feel like these modern writers and executives look at him like Superman, like, well, he just solved the whole story problem by himself, so we got to get him out of there. We got to
So let's talk. What about that? There, you talk about modern storytellers and executives. There has been some shakeups at these places. We have new people taking over the DCU or whatever they're going to call it, the DC movies studios. Marvel just dropped one of their big producers and kind of was in charge of the visual effects department. Victoria Alonso, she's in charge of the visual effects department, and she was the producer of a lot of the movies and things like that. And they just kind of really unceremoniously fired her off, and everything's kind of up in the air with Lucasfilm a lot too. I think Kathleen Kennedy's future really depends on how this Indiana Jones movie does, honestly, which is why I think this is my hot take. I think the reason there hasn't been any Star Wars movie big announcements is because Lucasfilm is waiting to see how Indiana Jones does, I think, to know what they're going to do about Lucasfilm. Because Willow tanked. People claimed they like it, but there were people claiming they liked it, but apparently not enough.
I don't know a single person that watched the show.
Me neither. But somehow there was somebody who thought they liked it, according to how Disney Plus tried to promote it. But then they, again, just unceremoniously said, "Well, it's over now. No second season." And so I really feel like this next Indiana Jones is really going to make or break the future of, like what Lucasfilm is going to decide to do and who's going to be in charge, honestly.
Yeah, it's just... I think everything needs to be taken back to the basics. I think moving forward, they should... If you're going to be adapting something, like maybe stick it closer to the source material. Don't try to, push your own message. Like, could you imagine if Peter Jackson did that with Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, which I just watched a Charlie Rose interview of Charlie Rose interviewing Peter Jackson. And it was when Lord of the Rings was Fellowship of the Ring was still in theaters and was just being called a box office hit. And he was being interviewed. And so this was before he was Peter Jackson of the trilogy, and winner of all the Academy Awards and stuff. They were just like, well, I bet you're pretty lucky to have this movie doing well. That was essentially how Charlie Rose was treating him. And he's like, yeah, it's great. And then, but in that interview, and my wife and I both found this really fascinating, Peter Jackson goes, this is Tolkien's story, and we felt like we had an obligation to honor the story that he wrote by essentially following his lead and working from there, instead of them going, well, I want to make sure I get this message in. How can I squeeze that around and fit that into here?
Yeah.
And I guess the juxtaposition show to that would be Rings of Power. That is, there's no good way to put it. It's bad. The only reason people are trying to say it's good is because it looks like the look is good, because they put every single dollar Bezos would give them into making it look well. But the story is garbage, and it's funny. My son I hadn't really said much about it around my son. He just saw a shot of those two, the dwarf sitting at a table with Elrond. He just saw that picture saying Rings of Power, and he's like, "Is that guy supposed to be an elf?" And I said, "Yeah, that's young Elrond." And he's like, "Oh." And then he looked over at the other two and he's like, "Are they supposed to be dwarves?" And I said, "Yeah, those are dwarves. Yeah, that's I think it was Durin, I think I think it's him in that shot." And I was like, "Yeah, they're the dwarves, and that's Elrond." He's like, "They just look like people." And I said, "Yeah, I guess they kind of do." And and I think that's the thing is it doesn't matter how good your show, how good the scenery and visual effects are, if your story is lacking, which I watched the first two and it's boring as all get out and pointless, and that nobody seems like they're what they are. It's just, I don't know, it was just very bizarre and very strange.
Yeah, Amazon kind of dropped the ball. I'm going to come out and say this 3 times.
Oh, because of Wheel of Time?
Yeah, Wheel of Time wasn't the first time, though. So Ryan Condal, who's behind House of the Dragon, one of the greatest new shows, I think, on TV, period. Don't come at me. Because I'm willing to die on this hill, man.
You liked that one, huh?
Oh, I love that one. I think I've rewatched the whole series like 4 times.
Wow.
Just that first season. But so he was actually prepping, and this bummed me out, a Conan the Barbarian TV show. And he was simultaneously trying to adapt the stories that Robert Howard wrote, and kind of combine a little bit of the look atmosphere from the Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it.
Oh, okay.
He was trying to find the balance, and they were working. I forget how many scripts they had ready. They were trying to keep it more in line with the Howard's vision. And they had a new head of production takeover at Amazon, and she's like, "No, I don't want this. It's problematic, toxic masculinity." She threw out all the words for something negative. It was transphobic, probably. She said,
okay.
Misogynistic. I don't know if I said that one already, but yeah. So it had to go. So everything he was working on got scrapped. HBO's like, hey, buddy, you wanna come make a Game of Thrones show for us? And he's like, sure. So he goes, he works on his show, and Amazon's like, hey man, we got like another fantasy series that's gonna blow people away. It's based on these books called The Wheel of Time. And The Wheel of Time comes out, and even the Wheel of Time fans don't like it. Because I have a few friends that are a fan of the Wheel of Time books, and they're like, what is this garbage? Like, what?
So Now, let me know if I'm wrong here. Now, some of what I feel like is what Conan the Barbarian, the idea is that, yeah, it is showing a little bit of a toxic masculinity, and that's a little bit of the point, right? And isn't that kind of what happens in House of the Dragon too? Is my understanding is that it's like,
oh yeah,
is like there is a lot of misogyny and toxic masculinity, but that's kind of the point is that you're not supposed to like them, and that isn't good. Am I wrong, or is that?
Yeah, that's it exactly. The whole show hinges on the fact that people aren't ready for a woman to take control once the king dies, and that's Rise Ifans. I always worry if I get this dude's name mixed up. plays like just the total perfect snob, like basically how you assume the British aristocracy is. Just totally snobbish, like yeah, and totally double dealing. He sends he sacrifices his daughter to hook up with the king, and they get married, and she starts having his children, and you could tell she's so unhappy. But it's like, well, he put me here, and then she slowly starts to realize that, hey, I'm actually the one in control here. He's just, he's just the hand of the king. I'm the queen, man. I'm the queen. But there's all that, and it's just like, yeah, like I said, no one I know that it's seen The Wheel of Time has liked it, because they've altered the books, they've kind of changed some things, and this was already a female-centric storyline, from my understanding of things. And then so that comes out, no one cares. They're like, hey man, we got another bullet in our gun, man, and this one's a 45 Magnum when it goes off.
Yeah, hollow point.
Everyone's gonna be paying attention. And it comes out same time as the House of Dragon, and everyone's like, how does this show that was made for like $160 million look like it was made for $1 billion? And the $1 billion show, why does it look like it was made by the people behind what was that show when we were a kid? Hercules' Adventure?
The Adventures of Hercules, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I'd say about Rings of Power, though, is that aesthetically, that's the part that it does well, is that it looks like something. I mean, you can tell there was money spent, but you don't give a crap.
See, for me,
and that's the sad part, because rewatching Lord of the Rings then more recently, almost to cleanse the palate of Rings of Power, you're like, man, it's crazy how quickly I was able to buy in to Frodo, to even Bilbo, who you only have like the very quick Galadriel's recap of how he came into the ring, and then just kind of his temptation to it, and his letting go of it, and going off to Rivendell and stuff. It's like how quickly I remember even the first time seeing it when I was in high school and didn't even really know the books other than I knew The Hobbit a little bit. And how I automatically already knew these characters' names and cared about them and stuff. And then you watch Rings of Power, and I'm sitting here going, I watched the first 2 episodes, which each episode's like an hour long, and I'm like, the dwarf guy, I think it was Durin. And the only reason I know that was Elrond is because it's Elrond, and you know him because, he's in The Lord of the Rings. But, yeah, there were these Harfoots that I'm like, I can't remember any of their names, because my wife and I just called them Fake Frodo and Fake Sam, because that's who they acted like, but they were girls. But it was like, yeah, she was just being a Frodo, and the other one was just being a Sam, and it's just like, and then there was Fake Gandalf, that's I think ended up maybe being Gandalf by the end of the series. I don't even know, which it doesn't make any sense to it's just crazy, and that's the thing. It's like. And that's the thing, is like, what's going on, Dakota? They have these surefire hits, right? You would think. What went wrong?
It goes back to just terrible execution. Like, I feel like...
How can you get so many people in the room that seem to be creatively creative, and it just falls apart? And I go back to, I think what we see is that money's not the answer. And you were just talking about that. It's like, because House of the Dragon was made for a fraction of the amount of money, and was very much more well received than Rings of Power.
Yeah, and I just think it. I think people, especially now in this day and age, just want to be entertained. Nobody wants to be preached at anymore.
Yeah, and that's where the bleeding is.
Yeah, and I mean. The game House of the Dragon, that was kind of based off a book that George R.R. Martin released a while ago, so they kind of had like a little bit of a roadmap.
Okay.
But there was a lot of room for basically them to, like, the costumes in House of the Dragon all look great. I kind of love how they redesigned the throne from the actual Game of Thrones show. I think the one in House of the Dragon actually looks a little more cooler because it looks like something where you just threw a bunch of swords together and melted it.
Yeah.
But and then, just the acting, like Paddy Constantine, he's been in like Hot Fuzz is the one thing that comes to mind right away.
Yeah, he's great in that. Yeah.
He is such a good actor in that, and in the show he plays a good man. He wants to do the right thing. He cares and loves for his daughter. He thinks, when I'm gone, man, she'll do a good job as king or queen. But it's like the rest of the world doesn't agree with him, and he knows it, and he's just like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? But he's a good man and a terrible king, and it's like it's interesting to watch that. Watch that dichotomy,
Yeah, of a good man but a bad king. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, and so they're playing with more interesting things.
Yeah,
and that's what I think. What we've been talking about is what's missing in these things, or many of these things, is just like, it's not about how cool it looks. It's about you wanting to invest and care about the characters. It's like Return of the Jedi as compared to Revenge of the Sith. It's like, I think without a doubt you could say, yeah, the better lightsaber fight is in Revenge of the Sith, but you're never going to top the emotional gravity of Luke fighting Luke fighting Vader in the Emperor's throne room.
Yeah.
And just the emotional investment you've had of like, he knows now this is his father, but down in his heart he's fighting this anger. He's fighting the fact that he wants to love his father. He wishes he could save his father, but at the same time he just sees that he's not sure if he can, and the Emperor is like trying to twist Luke and Darth at the same time, and then the Emperor gets to this place where he's telling Luke, yeah, kill Darth. And so you have like, it doesn't even matter that the lightsaber duel wasn't as magnificent. It's like that you have just that whole emotional investment of it all, and again, Revenge of the Sith is still a fine movie or whatever, but I think George Lucas started to lean a little bit more into the cinematic look he could give it more than the emotional, and lost some of the emotional tension between those two characters having their final bout in that way, you know. And so, yeah, and I think that's what's happening more and more now in movies, is that it's more about the spectacle and less about the characters.
Yeah, going back to House of the Dragon versus I keep wanting to call it Lord of the Rings, and I'm just like, that's so inappropriate.
Yeah, Rings of Power.
Rings of Power.
Rop was a flop.
Like Rings of Power versus House of the Dragon. There's Olivia Cook plays this character called the older version of Alicent Hightower. And now this is a good person. Like I said, she ends up marrying Paddy Constantine's character, so she becomes queen. And she is a generally sweet and caring person. When we were first introduced her, she gets older. And the world she kind of is stuck in, which is the life of a wife, a mother, subservient to a man, you can tell she kind of gets sick of it. And on the flip side of that, you have the character of Rhaenyra, where she kind of just does what she wants. She's technically married to this one character, but she's having an affair with this other guy and having his children. And it's just, the two of them see each other, and it's just like they were once upon a time best friends, but just based on their choices and their preferences, they grow apart till the end of the movie. It's like the knives are out, and just watching that alone, if you just cut their story arc and put it together, it'd probably be way more interesting than the entirety of what Rings of Power will ever amount to. And I think, like I said, that's good writing versus we got to we got to send the message to these people. Like I guess that's That's the true,
Yeah.
I guess.
I always get scared, and this isn't a perfect litmus test, but I do get scared a lot when they're interviewing people who are in a new thing that's coming out, and the main things they're excited about the thing they're in is like when they say these words like diverse, or turning things on their head, and like, or like, oh, you'll never see, I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. Like there's just these buzzwords that usually start with things like diverse and words like that.
I wish
where
when
it's like, oh, that's already making me nervous because it makes me think it's going to be more about preaching to me and less about an actual compelling story.
Yeah. Flip side of that, I just said that again. An interesting little story. Naomi Watts was actually supposed to be in a spinoff of Game of Thrones.
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
They made a 2-hour pilot, and apparently they were like, okay, this
filmed it?
Yes. And it was being passed around, and the execs at Warner Brothers were just like, this does not seem like Game of Thrones. And it was supposed to be woke. It was supposed to fix all the misogyny that you saw in Game of Thrones. And they're like, this doesn't feel like Game of Thrones.
Oh, funny.
Can this? Fire everyone. Burn these sets to the ground.
So they almost had their own Rings of Power.
Yeah.
But caught it in time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I heard another person that was supposed to be in that was she was a little girl, now she's an adult, but the girl who played Lucy Pevensey in the Narnia movies was also like, she was the other like main actress that was tied to that. I didn't know they actually filmed something. I just thought they just canned it and went a different direction.
No,
oh man.
And it's so bad. They put it in the vault, which for Warner Brothers, the vault, it's not like the Disney vault. This is not, stuff in the vault is not meant to ever be seen again.
Well, yeah, and then there's some things they put in there now that they're not allowed to for tax purposes. Can never, like Batgirl is never allowed to see the light of day, or they have to pay extra money because they basically shelved it and they're taking the tax write-off.
Yeah.
Like, oh man. So yeah, crazy stuff.
I think we're better off never seeing Batgirl. I'll be that guy for all of us. And just...
Brendan Fraser says otherwise, but I kind of have a tendency to agree with you. That it's probably, maybe it's okay.
Had they done Firefly from like the way they did him in the Batman Arkham games, I'd be up for a Firefly centric Batman movie.
I mean, it could be like what we've seen in other things where maybe Brendan Fraser's part was good, but maybe the rest of it wasn't as good. And so maybe that's why he had excitement for it, because sometimes that happens too.
Yeah, and those of you who were excited about Michael Keaton being there, don't, because he was apparently going to die in the film.
Yeah, which that really would have been dour.
And then Batgirl was going to go take vengeance.
Oh boy.
Yep, she was going to have a reason to go take vengeance.
There we go. But yeah, and so I think we need to wrap this up, Dakota. It's getting to be a little long, but hopefully somewhere in there you were able to kind of hear some of our thoughts, understand where we're coming from, and the main thing is like, my wish would be that most movies would be good, if not great. It's just that we're just kind of in this rut right now where so many are like, it's hard for you to be excited because you've been burned so many times. And so I would love to see a resurgence of quality material, maybe mixed with even some originality and things like this, that we just keep pushing that way, that there's kind of there's push. And I think it does start with the audience, that the audience just has to more and more demand it and to not settle for mediocrity, which is what I feel like is happening now, where everybody's like, well, that was pretty good because it was better than the last piece of garbage. And it's like, well, that's like saying, the bread that has a little less mold on it, I guess I'll eat that one because it's a little less moldy than the other piece of bread. I mean, it's like, they have all this money that apparently they're willing to spend. Let's demand that they spend it better.
I mean, on the plus side, I think Warner Brothers has got the message. It sounds like they're trying to...
I feel like they are, and so I really hope because WB used to be such a great studio, and I would love for them to kind of come back in a big way.
Yeah, hey, on the plus side, they do have an animated Lord of the Rings movie coming out eventually.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. One at War, isn't it War of Rohirrim? They're gonna
Yeah.
do. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Brian Cox, people, as Helm Hammerhand, baby. Yeah,
That's great casting.
Which,
Brian
hey,
Cox.
Speaking of Brian Cox, do you notice when he does those McDonald's commercials, he doesn't have his accent?
Bum bum bum. Yeah, he doesn't so much, does he?
And every time I hear it, I think of his character from Super Troopers.
Yeah, he's kind of going more Super Troopers and less Braveheart's uncle.
Yeah, he really laid into the accent there. didn't he?
Everybody did.
Yeah.
Mel Gibson did too, which was awkward, but yeah. So yeah, we hope you kind of caught some things in there. We would love to hear your thoughts, and where you can leave those thoughts is, well, if you're listening to this on YouTube, you could just leave them right below. Or if we're on Facebook, so you could find us on Facebook. We're just the Dakota Boys Talk Movies. You can find us there easy, and yeah. So we'd love to hear from you or hear your thoughts. We hope you enjoyed hearing our thoughts as we just talked about movies for a while, which is what we like to do. And so we thank you for listening to this episode of Dakota Boys Talk Movies. This is Steven.
This is Dakota.
Thanks for listening.